Welcome to Fall Asleep Through History. Tonight, close your eyes and drift into the story of a civilization that vanished beneath fire, steel, and something far more terrifying. Chapter 1. The Gods Had No Mercy. Before the fall, before the flames, and before the plague touched their skin, there was silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of fear cloaked in reverence. It whispered through the obsidian temples of Tenochtitlan. It echoed in the stone corridors of the priesthood. It lingered beneath the feathers of kings. The Aztec Empire, at its height, was an empire of gods, not merely ruled by them in name, but governed by the logic that the sun must be fed with blood and the earth soaked in sacrifice. To live was to bleed, and to bleed was to honor creation. In the heart of Lake Texcoco stood Tenochtitlan, a floating miracle, woven with canals, glowing with white stone temples and golden altars. It was not merely a city. It was a machine that fed on tribute, on submission, and on life. People whispered that the gods walked there. Their presence felt in the thunder above the Great Pyramid, in the cries of the warriors who offered their lives willingly. Every day, thousands bowed. Every day, hundreds were sacrificed. A knife of obsidian, a chest opened, a heart lifted. The crowd never turned away. Not in horror, in awe. Montezuma II ruled then. He was not merely emperor. He was chosen by the divine, a man draped in serpent feathers, a man who heard messages in dreams. He ruled with vision and with fear. He believed the end would come not with rebellion, but with something older, something celestial. He feared the return of Quetzalcoatl, the god who once left eastward with the promise to return when the world was ripe. So when strange sails were spotted on the horizon in 1519, he froze. Not in indecision, in prophecy. Chapter 2. The Arrival of the Foreign God. The sails were white, unfamiliar, and monstrous. They cut across the gulf like phantom wings thought to the Aztec priests on the coast. They did not look like ships. They looked like omens. The men who disembarked wore metal skins, spoke thunder, and rode beasts no man had ever seen. Their breath steamed in the morning light. They did not bow. They did not ask. They claimed. Among them stood Hernan Cortes, thin, watchful, with the eyes of a man who knew what it meant to gamble everything. He was not a king, but he carried the arrogance of one. To his men. He was a commander. To himself. He was fate. The locals brought gifts, feathers, gold, fruit. It was not welcome, it was tribute. They thought these men were gods. Perhaps they were. They bled, but they did not fall. They killed, but not in sacrifice. Their gods were hungry for power, not hearts. Cortes quickly learned the names Tenochtitlan, Montezuma, Quetzalcoatl, and he realized something far more powerful than weapons. These people were afraid of him. The story spread faster than the sails ever had. The god who left had returned. The prophecy was fulfilled. And Montezuma divine, mighty Montezuma sent gifts. He did not fight, he did not warn. He tried to appease, he sent gold. It was a mistake. Cortes smelled blood in the shine. His men, once mutinous, grew loyal. The gold promised kingdoms. The maps whispered of a city built in the middle of a lake, glowing like a second sun. The priests feared it. The king respected it. Cortes only desired it. He would not bow to Montezuma. He would walk through the gates of the empire, and when he did, it would never be the same again. Chapter 3. The Gifts That Led to Ruin. The gifts arrived in waves. Gold masks, carved jade serpents, turquoise ornaments, cotton garments embroidered with the patterns of gods. Montezuma believed that generosity might calm the divine, but it only fed mortal greed. 2. Cortes and his men. Each golden idol was not a symbol of reverence. It was currency, proof that a land of infinite wealth lay ahead. Every shimmering piece was melted down, stamped with crosses, and divided. Every gift was a message. They were close. Montezuma watched from his palace, torn. The signs were, their stars misaligned, eclipses that lasted too long, children born with deformities. The gods were uneasy. His priests warned him. His generals begged him, but Montezuma clung to the prophecy. He sent emissaries, hoping to delay, hoping to understand, but Cortes kept marching. He made alliances with enemies of the Aztecs, Tlaxcalans, who had tasted Aztec steel and wanted revenge. They welcomed the Spaniards with open arms, not as gods, but as weapons. Blood began to spill, not in sacrifice, but in conquest. Cortes' men slaughtered a city after a disagreement over supplies. Entire villages were burned. Idols were smashed. Crosses raised in temples. The god had command. He was erasing the old ones. Back in Tenochtitlan, Montezuma prepared, but not for war, for reception. He would welcome them into the heart of the empire. He believed this would show strength. It showed weakness. When Cortes finally entered the city, he marveled at its beauty. Gardens that floated, streets paved with clean stone, aqueducts that sang with water. The Spaniards had never seen anything like it, but they saw it not as a marvel to respect, but a kingdom to take. They were greeted with incense, dancers, and gifts. Montezuma himself descended from his throne to meet them, barefoot, humble. He offered his hand, Cortes took it. And within weeks, Montezuma was a prisoner in his own palace, not by chains, by courtesy. Chapter 4. Chains of hospitality. Montezuma still wore his crown. He still gave orders, but none of them left the palace walls. He dined with his captors. He performed rituals. His people still bowed. But behind the masks of tradition, his power was hollowed. Cortes installed guards at the palace gates. He claimed it was for Montezuma's safety, but the emperor was never allowed to leave. From his gilded cage, Montezuma watched the Spanish dismantle the order of the city. They demanded more gold, more silver, more tribute. Priests who resisted were executed. Shrines were desecrated. The Aztec people began to murmur. This was not a god. This was an invader, and their emperor had become his puppet. Outside the palace, resistance grew. Warriors whispered of rebellion. High priests spoke of betrayal. The Spaniards, though few, were hated. Then Cortes made a fatal error. He left. Word had arrived of Spanish forces sent to arrest him for insubordination. He marched out with his best soldiers, leaving behind a fragile occupation. In his absence, chaos erupted. During a sacred festival, the remaining Spaniards grew paranoid at the noise and singing. They stormed the ceremony. They slaughtered the dancers, the priests, the singers. The square became a lake of blood. The city exploded in rage. When Cortes returned, the empire he had just begun to tame was on fire. Aztec warriors surrounded the palace. Food ran low, water ran red. Cortes brought Montezuma to the rooftop, told him to speak, to calm his people. He tried. They threw stones. One struck his head. Days later, Montezuma was dead. Whether from wounds or strangled in silence by his protectors, no one agrees. But his death sealed the fate of his empire, and of those who claimed to be gods. Chapter 5. The Night of Sorrows. The night fell like a blade. Cortes and his remaining men knew they could not hold Tenochtitlan. The city, once welcoming, had become a cage of stone, canals, and rage. Every alley was a trap, every bridge a noose. So they planned an escape. Under the cover of darkness, during a rainstorm, they loaded gold and jewels onto horses, into bags, into the folds of their clothes. Greed slowed their feet before a single step was taken. They crept through the causeways, the narrow bridges that stretched across the lake from the heart of the city. The rain masked their steps. For a while it worked. But the gods, or perhaps the betrayed spirits of the city, were watching. A woman's cry split the night, a priest's shout, then drums, the alarm. Aztec warriors surged from the shadows with spears, slings, and fire. Arrows fell like hail. The canals became death traps. Horses panicked. Men slipped and drowned, dragged down by gold. The causeway collapsed beneath weight and sabotage. Men clung to stone and sank. Blood turned the water black. Cortes barely escaped, his armor torn, his face marked. He staggered to shore with a few dozen survivors. They had come as gods. They fled as thieves. The Aztecs called it victory. The Spanish called it La Noche Triste. The Night of Sorrows. Chapter 6. The Return with Fire. Cortes did not weep for long. He was humiliated. His ranks, decimated, thawed his pride in pieces, but his mind remained sharp, and his appetite for conquest had turned ravenous. Defeat only taught him patience, and patience, he realized, was the sharpest weapon of all. He fled east, to Tlaxcala, the same old enemies of the Aztecs who had once welcomed him with cautious alliance. There, he healed, his soldiers rested, and he made promises he never intended to keep. He told the Tlaxcalans they would share in the spoils of empire, that they would be free, that the gods would punish the Aztecs for their pride. But what he truly sought was an army. He received more than he expected. Thousands joined him, warriors painted for war, priests eager to see Tenochtitlan's shrines crumble, women who had lost brothers and fathers in Aztec tribute raids. Their hatred burned brighter than their fear of Spanish steel. But Cortes had more than warriors. He had horses, once strange and terrifying, now sharpened into weapons of lightning speed. He had guns, crude but thunderous. He had maps, and he had something far more potent than any sword: disease. Smallpox had begun to spread in Tenochtitlan like a curse whispered by the wind. It spared no one, not priest, not child, not warrior. The mighty fell with fevers and sores. The old gods did not protect them. By the time Cortes began his march back, the empire was not only weakened, it was unraveling. Villages once loyal to Montezuma now sent gifts to Cortes. Some opened their gates, others watched, terrified. As their children began to cough, when he reached the lakes again, he did not arrive with awe. He came with siege weapons, cannons dragged across miles of jungle, with native allies, far more numerous than his own men, and with the ghosts of Montezuma at his back. But Tenochtitlan did not yield. Montezuma was gone. His successor, Cuitlahuac, rallied what strength remained. The city had not forgotten the festival massacre. The people had tasted blood, and vengeance thought the causeways were destroyed, the aqueducts cut. The lake turned against them, and yet Cortes circled waiting, watching, starving the city. They built boats, brigantines on the shores, piece by piece, a floating fleet to blockade the island. And when the wind was right, when the drums ceased, and the sun rose like a sword, Cortes gave the signal. The siege of Tenochtitlan had begun. Chapter 7: The Siege of the Sunken City. The siege did not last days, it lasted months. The brigantines took to the lake like silent predators, circling the once glorious island city. From their decks, cannons roared across the water, sending stone and flame into the temples and homes of Tenochtitlan. The once pristine canals turned into watery graves. Inside the city, the people suffered. Food became a memory. Rats were hunted. Leaves were boiled into bitter soup. Children cried without sound. Disease stalked every shadow. Smallpox had not passed, had only begun. It had only begun. It tore through families, leaving only empty beds and fresh ash. Still, they fought. Aztec warriors, gaunt but unbroken, launched canoes under moonlight. They set Spanish ships aflame. They ambushed soldiers along shattered bridges. They fought not for victory but for memory, for the gods, who no longer answered. For ancestors watching from behind stars, Cortes tightened his grip. He advanced street by street, temple by temple. Each gain was paid in blood, each fallen Spaniard replaced by 10 more natives. But the city's defenders knew every turn, every alley, every rooftop. They turned the city into a labyrinth of death. Cuitlahuac had died. Smallpox took him, his successor. Cuauhtémoc was young, brilliant, unyielding. He wore eagle feathers and fire in his eyes. He led from the front. He fought barefoot through burning plazas. His name meant descending sun. And like the sun, he refused to vanish quietly. By the 3rd month, the city was a skeleton, temples scorched, markets abandoned. Bodies floated in the canals. Smoke hung so thick it blocked the stars. Mothers buried sons with bare hands. Old warriors danced their death rites before charging into cannon fire. And yet, no one surrendered, until the water ran dry. Cortes had cut the aqueducts. Disease finished what fire could not. And when the last defenders were too weak to stand, the Spanish pushed into the heart of the city. They found Cuauhtémoc still alive. Still defiant, he offered his chest. "Take my knife," he said, "and end this as you would an offering to your gods." Cortes did not. He took him in chains. The war was over, but the destruction had just begun. Chapter 8: The price of silence Tenochtitlan did not fall with a scream, it fell with a silence so heavy it crushed memory itself. When the Spanish marched through the city's broken heart, they saw not a victory, but a ruin of ghosts. The great temples, once crowned in crimson banners and golden suns, were rubble. Their gods lay shattered. Buried beneath the very altars that once demanded blood, courts did not stop. He ordered the city razed. Block by block, the Spanish tore down homes, sanctuaries, markets. Sacred codices, hand-painted records of centuries, were piled high and burned. The flames devoured language, erased gods, and turned wisdom into smoke. Priests who resisted were hung, others vanished. Entire families disappeared into dungeons, or worse, into oblivion. In place of temples, churches rose. The cross replaced the obsidian blade. Spanish priests chanted over the bones of sacrificed warriors. Gold was melted down not to preserve history, but to pay debts to kings across the sea. Cuauhtémoc was paraded like a trophy. Once the eagle descending, now a prisoner in chains, still defiant, still proud, he endured torture without confession. The Spanish believed he knew where the gold had gone, the vast Aztec treasure lost during the retreat. They burned his feet, they broke his body, but he never spoke. Am I on a bed of roses? He spat, as flames licked his skin. And still, silence. This was not just conquest, it was cultural execution. The Aztec calendar was declared heretical. The Nahuatl tongue was mocked, then criminalized. Names were changed, children baptized, masks destroyed, dances forgotten. Yet even as the empire bled into dirt, whispers survived. Elders told stories in hidden caves. Women wove symbols into cloth. Some priests buried idols in tree roots, praying the old gods would one day rise again. But the silence deepened. What price does the people pay when their gods die? For Tenochtitlan, the cost was not just the fall of a city, but the silencing of a soul. And for courts, it was never enough. Chapter 9, Godzin, Cuauhtémoc stood in chains, but his silence screamed across empires. Though his body was broken, his will refused to bow. For the Spanish, this defiance was maddening. They had taken his temples, his people, even his gods, but they could not take his secrets. Courts believed he had hidden gold. Whispers spoke of vast treasure buried beneath lakes, sealed inside pyramids, smuggled east by loyalists before the siege. Torture became a daily rite. They cut, they burned, they mocked his gods. But Cuauhtémoc gave nothing, not a word. Eventually courts had him hanged. But even in death, Cuauhtémoc became a symbol. To the Spanish, he was a relic. To the Aztecs, he became the last voice of gods in chains. In the ruins of Tenochtitlan, Catholic cathedrals rose. But below their foundations, priests and widows buried sacred items, obsidian blades, eagle feathers, jade beads. They built secret shrines, prayed to gods now declared demons. Christian missionaries replaced priests. They offered salvation but demanded silence. Children were renamed. Schools outlawed native myths. Punishments were harsh. And yet, resistance lived on in lullabies and rituals disguised as Christian feast days. And among these ruins, a question echoed: was the conquest truly for gold? Or had the Spanish come to erase something more threatening than armies on entire cosmology? A worldview that honored sun, blood, stars, death, and renewal. A cycle that could not be bought or ruled. Some say courts had instructions long before he left Spain to burn the gods, to write over history, to end a prophecy. And so they did. But the gods, even in chains, refused to be silent. Chapter 10, Echoes Beneath the Ashes. Centuries have passed. But if you walk the streets of modern Mexico City built atop the bones of Tenochtitlan, you can still hear the whispers. They rise from beneath cobblestones, between cathedral bricks, through the cracks of history's cemented lies. The Aztec spirit never truly died. It endured in silence, and now it echoes. Archaeologists uncover buried temples. Statues long hidden emerge from gardens, ancient murals returning classrooms. And young people, once baptized with borrowed names, reclaim Nahuatl words like fire returning to dry wood. Some say the gods are awakening. The question now is not how the Aztec Empire died, it's how it survived, not in gold, not in war, but in memory. The Spanish thought they had ended a world. But the ashes were never cold, not truly. They waited, and in every whisper, they burned anew.